I'd like to introduce now our keynote speaker, Bob Pearson. I asked Bob to speak because I thought he would be a great counterpart to Andrew in the sense of giving you guys the 30,000-foot look at the purpose of what are we doing in this crazy, incredibly confusing time. We dropped Bob's resume in the chat, but Bob defies a single label. He's a serial entrepreneur. He's a technologist who's worked for companies including Dell. He's an author. He's written 4 books. He teaches at University of Texas, and he also is a philanthropist. But interestingly, he advises the US government on misinformation, disinformation, and combating misinformation and disinformation. And so I'm guessing that we're all grappling with this issue, that even if you have the right data, you have to be heard, and how to be heard. Bob is also an expert in communications, and I asked him to speak on 2 topics because he's been on both sides of the aisle, so to speak, on the journalism side. Asked him to speak about the whole misinformation, disinformation, information data landscape, but then also to advise you as journalists how not to be spun, especially in an era where spinmeisters are getting more and more and more sophisticated. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Bob.
Sunny, thank you. And I really appreciate having the opportunity to speak with you. I look at this audience and think of the future of society. Your ability to decipher what's happening and not get spun, and to get out there and unlock truth is so important. So we'll talk about disinfo, but we'll also talk about some opportunities for the future of journalism as well. So there'll be some positive components here too. Just as a quick backdrop, I've had an opportunity and continue to look at 190 countries of the UN in terms of what is happening in terms of consumption of content, media behavior, media trends, and then also look at how adversaries come against us, whether they are actual countries or if they are extremists who are trying to recruit people for a cause that we would not view as being good. So we'll dive right into it. I will hopefully leave enough time for some questions. If you put anything in chat, even if we can't answer it here, I promise that I will come back to Sunny and the team with answers to those questions post-call. So let's go right into the talk itself. First part of this, we're going to look at how the media world is evolving. I mean, one of the things that's really important is to actually step back for a second and say, how is our world actually changing, in terms of media? And that gets us into this, which is, if we go back 50 years ago in media, we would say that if we were in a media outlet, we were kind of defining what people would get, what they would like, and we had a lot of control over what people could do. Now what we say is really the humans are actually shaping the way that we consume media and are driving the change to a large degree. And if we look at this in a little bit closer, when you break down media worldwide, there's actually 2 companies in one country that are having an outsized influence on everyone else. And if you look at Facebook and all of its properties, when you look worldwide, Facebook is very clearly the media platform of choice for most people, and their preference is to receive content through their phone. One of the interesting things is that the mobile phone, the average age that people start getting a phone worldwide is about 10 years old. And so, when you think about like our brains form habits and memories between age 10 and 25, between birth rather, from birth and 25, majority of those memories and habits get locked in. So between 10 and 25, the center of the universe is this phone, and they're often getting content through social. One of the things that we're also seeing is that Google has tremendous influence, and I'll talk about that in further slides. And of course, China. And I don't mean China automatically from oh no, what is China doing? But actually, there's a lot of innovation that is occurring in China that's really important for us to understand what they're doing, whether it's what they're doing with Tencent or Weibo and TikTok and more. Third item up here is attention spans. Our attention spans are probably always lower than we thought. But when we look at the amount of data, in other words, looking at how many videos we consume in Facebook, which is 10 billion plus on a day. If we look at what's happening with Pandora or Spotify, we look for music. What's happening is we're conditioning ourselves to make choices in 1 or 2 seconds. 3 seconds is being generous. So how we grab people in becomes more important. The fourth item up here is who we respect as authority figures. What we're seeing, and this is not a surprise, is if you look at YouTube and Instagram and Twitter, it's the people that are in front of us most often in our daily cadence of learning become the ones that we trust the most. So just like many years ago, it would have been Walter Cronkite. Now it can be someone on Instagram who we've never heard of. And so understanding who these folks are and realizing the influence they really do have is key. And then the fifth, which we'll get into a little bit here, is that where are people going and spending time? And the 2 biggest media platforms on earth today going forward are gaming and message platforms. So there's nearly 3 billion people in each worldwide. And people are spending an exceptional amount of time in both. So how we become relevant in and around them is going to be key. So we're going to now go through slides a lot quicker, but that's just an overview just to get us going. This is something that just came out literally in the last week. The domain that people go to most often in the world in 2021 was TikTok. So last year, TikTok was 7th or 8th on the list. Now it's number 1. I'm not saying that's good. I'm just saying that's reality. And then Google is number 2, and then Facebook. So this just shows where people are visiting the most worldwide. The other thing too is, I've had, when we look at social media, people sometimes will say like, well, it's who knows what they're really doing. It doesn't matter. Well, Charli D'Amelio on TikTok, and she's got her own unique style, so I'm not here to say whatever she does is good or bad, but her audience is 114 million followers. The CNN primetime audience is a little over 1 million. So it doesn't mean that primetime audience isn't high quality, but the question is, if we're trying to reach people, we have to look at where are people going, and that's one of the key points here. If we look at TV, this has been going on for years, but TV is being redefined really into, I like to consume visual content. That can be short form content. It can be video that's going through social. It can be TV, it can be streaming. It doesn't really matter to us. That's what we're finding out. So TV is still important, but with the evolution of what we view as TV overall is changing. The other little thing that you may know is YouTube is actually the 2nd largest search engine on earth. Google 1, YouTube 2nd. The attention span. This is, when I look at the attention span, the good news is when we do get people's attention, right headline, right image, something that brings them in, people will spend time. That's what we see consistently online, is people will come in and they will read something, or they will hang in there and listen to a video. But if we don't get their attention right away, they're gone. And this is something that I know with, as a writer of content, certainly not at the level of the folks in this audience, but we want to believe that people just want to come in because what we're writing is so awesome that they're going to come in and make the time. And some of our audience will do that. But if we want to expand our audience, we have to also expand how we actually reach people. The next part, and this is in the first half of the talk, is we're going to get into some more of the disinfo measures and why those are important and what does that mean. And I had an opportunity to spend time with the Defense Science Board in 2019. And one of the things that we talked about was what's happening in the world. And what we realized is we're not in a hot war in this regard. We're not in a cold war. We're kind of in this middle, like lukewarm war, where the ability to throw people off balance is actually becoming a tool that can be used, not necessarily for good at all, but it's out there being used. So this is a little bit more on bad actors. And one of the reasons why it's important to study like the bad actors that are the most overt, meaning like say counterfeiters or drug dealers, is they all use the same tools, the same techniques, and the same platforms. So if we want to find folks who are trying to hide from us, we actually can study the ones who are not hiding as much, and we can see exactly what they're very likely to do. So what's happening in this, what we call the new threat mix, is, devices are very easy to penetrate. Most of the world is Android. Every time there's a new update of Android, there's thousands of bugs. It's not hard for an adversary to get into someone's phone. So that's just something for us to just, be conscious of. The ability to hide is good and bad. In message platforms, we're in oftentimes a private encrypted platform. I think one of the good examples of this is if you look at Belarus and we look at the opposition has used Telegram and other ways to go into private platforms to talk and plan as they try to mount an opposition to the current leadership in Belarus. So I think it can have some societal impact that's positive, but it's also a great way for bad actors to hide. So this is, we'll get into more of this in a second as well. These are the 7 examples of how bad actors work today. And so I think we automatically spend a lot of time on disinformation because we talk about it a lot and it impacts us, certainly in the news media. But if we really look at it, ransomware is rampant, and that we know we'll get into all of these. Illicit drugs can be sold very easily online in the United States today through social media. Counterfeit goods and products and services can be sold. Disinformation is being used against us as a tool to throw us off balance. Extremist groups are finding it as easy as ever to recruit. Censorship is starting to occur in ways that we don't realize, where you can actually censor people without them even being fully appreciative they're being censored. And of course, any of these tools could theoretically be used at any time to try to interfere with elections. And I say try, because I don't want to presuppose that they are or aren't. That's for folks like yourself to decide at the right times. So if we get into how ransomware works today, I'm going to go through each of these a little bit. I'm not going to go through the whole, like this slide in detail, but from a journalistic standpoint, you can see the entire supply chain of how ransomware works, from where a group might be planning in St. Petersburg, Russia, for example, right through how they enter the system of a colonial pipeline or another company, the techniques that they use, the channels they use, everything. This stuff is more available than we perhaps realize. These are criminal gangs that are fairly organized and know how to go against us. But there's not a lot of time spent, in my view, on understanding how they work. There is a lot of time on, ooh, someone got hit by ransomware, not let's expose how ransomware works and really look at what's going on and what that threat is against really any organization worldwide. Conti is an example up here. If you look at 22.3%, that's fairly recent data looking at their percent of ransomware that's known at that time. If you look at where they focus, you can see data like this for the services that they focus on the most. So you can see where attacks may be most likely to go. And this will, of course, change over time. But they're actually good business people in that they understand where to spend their time so they have the best return. If we look at illicit drugs, I did some work for the US Chamber of Commerce a while back, and we looked at how could illegal drugs move into the US and what does that mean? And what you see is that people do all kinds of things, but they will do things like, go to here, like they'll put up a ghost account on Instagram. And in that ghost account, you'll notice that it has a WhatsApp number in there. Well, if you go to that WhatsApp number at that time, you could then have a private conversation to then figure out where to go in the dark web to then go figure out how to get drugs. So, but meanwhile, Instagram sees this eventually and shuts it down and declares a victory because we've deleted an account, but the work has already been done. Another example of this would be, this is another actual example This was a account that was giving out information to sell illicit drugs on Twitter, but it was shut down about a month after we saw it. So again, it counts as a victory as we're deleting an account, but the reality is it's not a victory because people were actually using it actively before that. So the other thing you get into then is how hard is it to fool us? And if this was a group, which it's not, of bad actors, and we wanted to do this, we can build fake personas on Twitter or other places fairly quickly, meaning in days. We can buy a followers. We might say we want 100,000 followers. We can purchase those followers and build up our list. We can figure out which keywords we should be putting in our tweets, and then build bots that will then retweet those keywords with links. So we start to actually impact search. So when people search, they find the links that actually go to the sites that we don't want people to go to, but they do want people to go to. So it's still relatively easy to game the system to actually get people to go to the wrong places. And so we have to basically up our level of sophistication in order to actually understand and expose bad actors and diminish their impact. Now, this is an example of two people that look pretty normal. They're both fake. These are stock photos from Google. And then the 100,000 followers and 219,000 followers are bought. And then on the right, what you see is if you're actually looking, if you're doing data science and you're looking down at who's moving content, the good thing about bots, at least today, is they're very machine-like. They're very good at doing their job. So you can see how linear they look. And this is actually a bot network. It just made to look a little prettier. But you can actually see when you have artificial work going on. So our ability to track these things is really good. Our discussion of those same things is probably less than it could be at this moment. And then, if you're bad actors, they just look at us in the business world and say, what's working? And if you took an Amazon model with affiliates and you said, you want to get affiliates to sell your product so you can drive more traffic to Amazon, that's basically what they do here. And so they figure out how to get people who will move their content along. And if they move enough of it, they can get incented and so on. So they are very conscious at looking at what we do well and then copying it. Disinformation, this is some great work by other folks looking at what are all the different types of eroding trust. And you can actually break it into at least 7 here, where the completely false content is like, hey, Bill Gates created COVID-19, and actually that was one of the campaigns that came out of Russia. But what I worry about more is misleading content and things like that, where you can use software today where you could create content on a topic right now, have 95% of it be accurate, but just put in one part of a quote that's wrong or put in one fact that's wrong. So if I wanted to disinform a society longer term, I could do it in a way that people probably wouldn't even spot the disinformation right away unless they were really looking at it closely. So we have to get increasingly sophisticated at how we do this, because the best disinformation looks like information. So we'll get into that as well as we go. The next part here is looking at what drives deception. And one of the things that's very interesting is audio compression allows us, it was actually first started by war correspondents who were looking for ways to compress audio so they could report in the field, upload, get something in the cloud, edit it, and send it off. And what you can do today is if you were listening to me right now and you had a couple minutes of what I'm saying, you can take my voice, and next thing you know, you can get me to sound like I'm saying something I'm not, because we're able to manipulate the voice. So we're able to manipulate audio. We can do the same thing with content. And then you get into other things that are happening today, which are not as widespread as they could be, which is great, but they will be, which is when you look at like having fake discussions, you can use bots to have fake discussions to draw people in. So then you can see, oh, they seem to have these types of views. We can see this. Now we're going to go in and talk to them. So imagine if you're, you know, an extremist group and you're trying to get people to come in. You may not want to go out there yourself. You use bots. You now see someone's very, could be a victim to bring in. You go out to them and you say, hey, let's go talk in this message platform. And you now have a private conversation focused on recruiting them. So the ability to deceive, the ability to manipulate is only going to continue to increase. So our need is to up our game in terms of how we understand technology, how we understand what's happening, so we can be smarter than that.
Bob, sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt. We have a question. What is NLP? I think taking you back.
Oh, okay. Natural language processing. Yeah,
Can you
and so
explain a bit more about that?
yeah, so natural language processing on a positive side, you could just be looking at how do people use certain words, and if they use certain words, let's say in a certain way, we can actually say, got it. Like let's say we're talking a certain way with a certain dialect. You could actually then pick that up much quicker in natural language processing. Oh, there's folks here who are speaking like this. Got it. Boom. So it's the ability to analyze words and how they orient together more effectively. That's essentially what we do with that. The next thing is on censorship, and with censorship, certainly the way I grew up, I always thought of it as like you completely block someone. That was censorship. But the reality is algorithms are allowing us to be very sophisticated, not me personally, but adversaries, where you can do things like shadow banning. So shadow banning is a great example where, let's say I'm on TikTok or another outlet, or it could be any outlet in the world. Let's put it at that. And I'm putting out videos, I get 10,000 views every time. But I'm saying something about a group that people don't like. That person running that group, the company is now saying, you know what, let's decrease their views. Now, all of a sudden, I'm doing a video, I'm getting 500 views. So I don't understand that I'm being shadow banned, but I'm being, my ability to reach people is being limited. So that does happen today. And we have to become better at understanding how people are being censored because they are, let's say, talking about things, that a country doesn't like or a group doesn't like that has control of that company. And so that's just something to put out there. This is something I did I wouldn't call it for fun. It was just to show an example. I was asked, how could you interfere with an election if you wanted to? And this is just 15 ways that you could do it. There's another 15 and another 15 after that. But this is just to give an example of all the different techniques that you could be using to interfere with an election. So I think it's, in my view, less about our people, what's actually happening at the ballot box. It's more of what techniques are people using to influence communities before they ever get there. And that to look at the techniques used, if you go outside the US, you can often see these techniques used quicker. So if we think of some of the elections here that we have been concerned about, you could see a pattern from Russia messing with elections in dozens of countries, kind of getting their techniques to where they thought they were working well, so they might have a better chance in countries that they were bigger like ourselves, where they might try. And I'll leave it at might try because it's up to you to decide who's trying and who's not. But I'm pretty confident that they try a lot. Then polling is another one too, where we're seeing that if you use social media well with polling, we can get more accurate. And I'll give you an example of this. When you ask someone a question in primary research, you're tapping into short-term memory. So short-term memory, you can remember usually 3 to 7 things per topic. But if you're actually looking at what people are searching for or who they're following, what you're seeing is subconscious behavior. It's usually what they really believe. So if you're looking at both things, both subconscious behavior online and what people tell you in polls, you can see when there's a complete difference. And if you looked at Wisconsin in the United States, you, I think, would have seen that pretty clearly. If you looked at the entire United Kingdom during Brexit in that area, you would have seen that. That data was available if people were looking at it in the right way, but we're so locked into polling that we often don't look at what's happening subconsciously to the exact same audience at the exact same time. So now let's get into part two, which is opportunities for journalism. So that's enough of the, things that are like important for us to get to know better. But oftentimes we like to say the best defense is a good offense. And so this gets back to what I was saying earlier, is that human beings are the new media. So they are deciding where your story will go, where will they share it, who will see it beyond the core audience that you have today. And so being part of understanding how an audience shapes an overall story is key, I think, for tomorrow's journalist. These are just some things that you can see, like our brains are very finite. Start there with humans. If you took any topic that you would go deep on, a community of people cannot think of more than 200 to 400 questions about that topic. So theoretically, we could answer all those questions and we would actually satisfy the audience to a great degree. If you look at things like on the right, the number of influencers who drive share of conversation, for any topic that we have in the United States, you will see that there are not more than 50 people who drive the majority of share of conversation. And by I say people, often journalists, but it's not limited to journalists. It can be journalists, it could be social media influencers, it could be anyone where their audience cares that when they do something, they're going to listen and share it. And if you think about what creates influence, it is not volume, it is engagement. Because if anything resonates with people, they're going to move it, share it, and it will gain influence very quickly. So there's two media models I wanted you to just remember as you go, and be happy to talk about these in more detail at any time. The first one is when you look worldwide, any place in the world where there's media, which is almost the entire world, less than 1% of content of people are what we call content creators. You are content creators. You are in the 1%. 9% of us decide what to do with it. They share and repackage because they want to reach their communities and actually either teach them, give them an idea, but they feel an obligation to share. And then 90% of us don't do anything. We are passively looking at Google. We look at social media. We read newspapers and magazines. We watch TV. We benefit from everyone else. So if I'm a journalist of tomorrow, I want to know where I am in that 1%. Like, am I moving up the ranking, essentially, to have influence in the topics that I care about? And the 9%, who's following me? Who am I following? So when I say something, it will actually reach a bigger audience. So if you were writing on healthcare and it happened to be about breast cancer, I would say, well, who are the people who care the most about breast cancer in the topics you address there? Are you following them? And so when you say something, they're going to move it on to that community, and you're going to end up building a bigger total audience for what you do. I realize that not everyone wants to do that, but I'm just saying this is how it's working and has been working worldwide for quite a while. The 5 R's of media efficiency. What we say, this is when we're with companies or any organization really is, do you know who the right influencers are? The right audience, content, language, and channels. In your case, as journalists, I would say, okay, if you're writing a great piece for your outlet, where could you move it next that would reach the audience? Could you put it into Facebook? Should you tweet it? Should you put it in LinkedIn? I mean, the answer is very rarely do nothing. It's almost always where can you complement, where you can send so you can reach people. And I'll leave that at that for right now. The next one looks at why that's as important. This is a concept that we call content elasticity. If you look on the left, this is a typical press event. There's an announcement, everyone does coverage, and it goes right back to normal within 24 hours. So the conversation of that community doesn't really change. They get excited for a minute or interested, and they go right back. What we find on the right is if we have people's attention and then we share them, meaning the 9% relevant content, links back to other parts of our website, additional videos, additional facts, additional Q&As, people will continue to have the conversation about a topic and will keep driving share conversation for that topic. And they will often do that for weeks or months. So if you have a topic, so I think of like, let's take Flint, Michigan and lead in the water. And that when it was all going on, if outlets had said, hey, we're going to feed people every day on Q&As and videos and other snippets and other information we have, in addition to the reporting we're doing, they would have built an audience that would have been far bigger and wider than other outlets, very likely. So that's just an example. This is what drives people. We look at humans and we say, why do they share information? And this is what they do, and this is what they admit to doing, is they want to share ideas with their friends, their version of an idea. They want to share knowledge, and they want to help their peers solve a problem. They're doing it really altruistically to say, like, I'm going to do something to help the people that I care about. So anytime we can figure out who those folks are and say, hey, if someone client or someone on your behalf, hey, here's an article we just did, thought you might like it. I mean, it could be literally that simple, and boom, they go. Next one, search. Thinking of Google, Bing, things like that. Search is I always say, the most important and least understood media platform on earth. And when you look at it, what Google's really doing is it's essentially storing and indexing everything that's important for us worldwide. So one of the things that we have done in the past, for example, is in Texas, we actually looked at everything stored in Google and then looked at the issues that matter to Texans, thinking of like healthcare and education and topics like that. And then said, okay, where do they care? And we could tell you by town, which towns cared the most about which topics, which people cared about, were most influential, which journalists actually were most influential, which towns were impacted by local news, which ones by national and local, which ones more by national. And the results were quite interesting. That kind of thing can be figured out. And I think that's important for journalism, because if I was a journalist, I'd be thinking, my information that I'm writing about is important. How do I make sure that it's getting out to the people who will benefit it from the most? And so if I think like that, I think, okay, I can't just depend on them to buy the outlet I have. I can't just depend on them to come to our website. I have to also go out and proactively find them, introduce them to some concepts that may get them to want to learn more about what we're doing. But think of Google as an amazing library ready to answer our questions if we know how to use it well. And this is just an example. This is looking at a topic that has nothing to do with probably most of the stuff you do every day, but it's non-small cell lung cancer, looking at stage 4, and looking at which organizations actually have the most impact on each area of non-small cell lung cancer. Well, you can do the same thing for people. Which people have the most influence by each of these topics? And so the right analytics with Google will actually give you those answers. And again, if we think we're making an impact in something, we can now judge ourselves and say, well, how much impact are we really making? And how would we improve as we go? This is something that's so simple and fascinating, and I have talked about this with a number of news bureaus of size and stature. I have yet to see anyone doing this really well, but I do think it will happen. is when you look worldwide and say, how do people communicate most effectively? In other words, why does someone on YouTube have 5 million subscribers and someone on Instagram has 5 million followers, and we're struggling to get another 10,000 people to pay attention to us? What is going wrong and what's happening? Well, when you look anywhere in the world, look at Korea, look at Japan, look at US, look wherever, it's when people personalize content, they connect with the audience. And so what this really means is that, if you think of my version of years past, I would put on the news, I listened to what the anchor said, and it was like the gospel. That was it. Well, nowadays it's like, okay, who are you listening to? It's going to be who do you trust, because they're personalizing it. So imagine this for the future of journalism. We are doing great news today. We have a 60-minute show. Great, done. We now say we're going to go to Facebook, and one person each day is going to say, "Hey, my name is Bob, and I'm with X outlet, and these are the 2 news stories today that I thought were really interesting. And here's a link back to our highlights." And I'm doing that every day on Facebook. Well, over time, you're like, you know what? I kind of trust what Bob is telling me. I'm going to actually follow him, and I'm going to actually start to consume news that way, which is the news that's coming right off your site. So we can be doing that over and over. Hey, I just wrote the last 3 columns I wrote. These are 2 of the things that I learned from writing this column. And I just wanted to put this towards you, for you on Facebook. So that ability to personalize it, get outside of the newsroom, will make such a big difference for us connecting with our audience. Not hard to do, just not something we're used to doing. And so people go, great idea. And they say, okay, when are you going to do it? And then they go, oh, well, and then, we all go back to our busy lives. So what can you do differently? There's a lot of stuff that you can pick up from all of this, but one of them is, building your personal media platform. Think of yourself as a media outlet working for a media outlet. So yes, you have a media outlet that wants to grow, but how can you expand your reach? Who can you follow? Who can you share content with? So you're expanding the reach of what you do, and also the outlet that you work for. How can you personalize your reporting? Can you introduce your articles, or can you do a video that you introduce? Could it just be something as simple as, hey, when we did this story, this is one of the photos that was taken, and I just thought it was very symbolic of what we were trying to do. I thought I'd share this on Instagram. Or, in the comments, we got 50 comments for this article. Let me try to answer the 3 or 4 most common questions, and you put it in LinkedIn, and then you tweet it. So that ability to show that, like, you really care about the stories you're writing, which you do. I mean, that's the ironic thing. You can't be, as you know, you can't be in your field without really deeply caring. So it's like, how do you take that and just get people to realize that you do, so then you become part of their world? And I think this is something that my view is every outlet should embrace. It's not about you trying to be a hero or heroine. It's about you making sure that people can learn, be educated, and become part of really the media world. So now we get into, as technology transforms society, there's some new opportunities that come up as well that are kind of neat. And one of them is, I mentioned private message platforms, right? So there's a lot of private message platforms that are emerging worldwide. But think about this, if you go to Telegram, which was created, by the way, by the gentleman who created VK, and he didn't like the way he was being handled in Russia with VK, so he then went and created Telegram. And there's a bunch of media outlets that are in there sharing information. But when you look at all of the message platforms worldwide, there's another Ted Turner ready to be started somewhere. Because we should be saying, how could we take our news and develop message platform groups around the world in key countries and create an affiliate network of, let's say, 1,000 groups, So every day, Voice of America, or every day NBC, or every day X is putting out the same content, but now reaching people in the language of their choice, in the group of their choice, in a private environment anywhere in the world. That is going to be awesome. And that could lead to subscriptions, and that can lead to all the other things that the business people will want. So it's not like that's out of the question. But this will happen. It's just, I've never had anyone say anything other than this should be done. But it's going to take someone with the entrepreneurial courage and conviction to say, you know what, this is going to work. So this, I think it's a huge opportunity for journalism over time. The second thing is, if we look at how people learn, half of all search today is audio. You know, think of yourself. We're telling Siri what to do, or we're talking to Alexa, or we're always seem to be talking to a machine. Well, that means that the next wave of media innovation will occur in audio. So in other words, think about it like this. Well, one is your voice being heard in an audio format? So that's important. You know, that's where podcasts do play a role. Being on Spotify does play a role. Letting people learn from you that way is key. And you do see more and more of that in journalism, which is fantastic. But the other thing is the ability to create stories through audio is going to rapidly change. Just like with video right now, it's not hard to create a video story if you're an individual at your computer. And it's going to be just as easy or easier with audio. So how do we maybe report quicker sometimes, or report through audio and video and not always through text or video? I mean, or you know, like a formal outlet. So this is something to think about, because the world is clearly moving in the direction of streaming and things of that nature. This is related to it with the phone and what we can do there. Gaming. So when we look at gaming, you know, more than 3 billion people game today. They spend an average of about 6 hours a day. I think it's 6 hours a week gaming, but if you know any gamers yourself, you know that it's probably closer to 6 hours a day, right? So they're making up for the handful of folks who don't do it. It's a huge industry. Today's 2021 was actually 175 billion. This is outdated data. I got to update the slide. This is 145. It's 175 billion. It's about 10 times the size of the NFL. And so what we're finding is it's not just gaming. It's people are doing email there. They're doing chat. They're learning. It's a community. Well, a community needs a newspaper. A community needs news, period. And the ability to come in with news you can use in gaming environments is something that, if done well, could be received quite well. You know, because what usually happens, as you all know, with innovation, is everyone says something can't happen when you first bring up the idea. So in gaming, people said, well, you can't do email, and we're doing email. Well, people won't want to do multiplayer games, but then they did. Well, people won't want to share video, but then they did. People won't want to do e-commerce, but then they did. And so this is always what happens, is we have a tendency to push back on what's possible until it happens, and then go, oh, that makes sense. So news in gaming platforms will make sense. The ability to do gamification, for example, like take Jeopardy and do Jeopardy online for people for STEM. You know, we could be doing that all day long. You can do game modifications where you take an existing game that's very popular, but we might want to turn it into something related to climate change. You know, so we can get people to play the exact same game, but they're actually now learning about climate change, and they're getting credit for that. So they're the same incentives and all that. So there's a lot of innovation that can occur in gaming as we go. Just a couple more things, and I realize I'm going towards, you know, we got only 15 left. So a couple more things very quickly here. One is there is an invisible search engine that's being developed right in front of us, and it's just something to be aware of. It's not good or bad. I actually think it's more good than not. But this is Alexa. And so Alexa is not Alexa to pick on Alexa. The Alexa-like technology is listening to everything we're doing. And what we're doing is we're building devices as the Internet of Things is growing, where smart devices can all be captured, the data can be captured, and we can start to make sense of what's happening. So yeah, that part of that could be, hey, you need more eggs in your refrigerator. That's easy. But the other part is, what is our behavior like? Are we depressed? Are we happy? Is there an alarm? Is there some urgency for something? So there can be really positives that could come out of this to help people with different conditions and things like that. So keeping aware of how this will change is key. It will also lead into, of course, privacy and health safety issues and things like that as well. This is the last one I'm going to leave with here is one of my favorites, is the shift from genome to menome. And genome, we're getting reasonably good at understanding how to sequence DNA and see what it tells us, and people are very curious about it. But what is going to be happening more and more is that we will be asking for a personal cloud, and that will be my menome. And in the menome, we will have our gene sequence, but we'll also have our health records, and we'll also have our Fitbit data, and we'll also have anything else that is related to us health-wise. And with the right software, you can start to make sense of this disparate data. The problem with this is not, can it happen or will it happen? Companies would love to do this. The issue is going to be, what are we willing to accept from a privacy standpoint? Does this improve our safety? What happens if this information leaks? So this is the kind of thing where if it's discussed more often and more intensely, could lead to the breakthroughs that could actually lead to transforming people's health. And as you know, one of the, I think, amazing things that journalists often do is you force society to look at issues quicker and more deeply, and it can lead to the breakthroughs that actually maybe allow industry to go then build stuff on it. But if without you, it would never get there. So this is just this is a top 10 list for you to have. I won't go through this list on the future of disinfo, going back to our earlier part of the conversation. And I leave it with this, is that the ability to impact our audience, it's never been more important, more relevant, and there's never been more options on how to do it. So my hope is that every journalist will think about, how do I actually harness media and technology so I reach the optimal audience, so I actually, quite frankly, learn from that audience more effectively. And also, I know enough about technology that I can be ahead of where not only bad actors are, but also just where industry is going. So we can actually reflect what needs to be talked about at the right times. And I'm confident we can do that.
I will say for myself, and also judging by our fellows' faces, I think many of us found that both very interesting and in places very disturbing.
Right.
So I will open it up now to folks. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand or unmute. I can kick us off. So one thing I was really interested in, given all the disinformation, I was thinking specifically around January 6th. Do you think that, how effective do you think journalists can be when this kind of revisionist history has taken such a strong hold, even among people who, there was a pretty widespread agreement on the day of, and since that has changed quite a bit.
Yeah, well, and it's an interesting question because there's a couple parts to it. One is, if hopefully this never happens again, but let's say something else like this is looking like it might happen, our ability to actually monitor how people are talking about it in forums, in the dark web, in maybe these like alternative channels is critical, because you can see what people are really saying. And that I think is going to be an intelligence aid to journalists that I think we need to do a better job of making available to everyone. When you actually look at the insurrection itself, and what I look at is what kind of content is coming out about it, and how is search changing. So this is where search is such a great indicator. We can have all the metrics in the world, how many stories are written, But what matters is how are people engaging with those stories? And if you did, let's say 100 search queries about January 6th, what's showing up on the first and second screen? And so if you see that story changing, then history is changing for good or bad, right? And so I would be watching that like a hawk to say what's happening. Now I realize you have to write whatever you think is appropriate to write, so I wouldn't suggest that, but that is a great marker.
Hi, Bob. My name is Gabriel Cortez. I'm with CNBC. Thank you so much for that presentation. My mind is exploding. But my question for you is, you know, we track our numbers pretty closely in terms of which stories are hitting really nicely, be they on Google AMP or Facebook or whatever. And it often feels like we're chasing that high. Yep. We're chasing getting picked up on one of those two that you mentioned, and that is indeed where the majority of our traffic comes from. Is there a way, or have you begun to sketch out in your own mind a smart way so that we shift the paradigm, or so that we shift the way of our thinking? Because right now it feels like we're in this constant marathon that we can never really finish. And we're always out of breath. And again, we're just chasing this high story after story after story, and it never seems to be enough. Is there a way that we can change the way we think about that so that we're not chasing the Google algorithm? And you know, you live by the algorithm, you die by it. They changed something a couple of weeks ago and it decimated our numbers. They've since come back up, so I don't know if they did enough.
Yeah, they do that all the time. You're right.
Yeah, and it's just like what do we do? We were doing great for a while, and then suddenly this plummet. So like,
no, it's a very good point. And so let me give you a quick thing. And this is an area that we call audience architecture. There's so many things that we can't get into tonight in a quick hour. But for CNBC, I would say, okay, who's your audience? What do they care about? You know that. Like, you know all the details of that. That then leads to, this is where data science is helpful, because you'd say, okay, what are these profiles of what people look like? Where are other people that are like-minded, that if we could just introduce them more to what CNBC is talking about, we could double or triple the audience. That's what you do with a company, is you say, okay, we already reached this group. We don't need to keep reaching them over and over. We need to see, what are they like? Where are people like them? And then how do we reach them? And that would show that, hey, maybe we need to show up more on LinkedIn, you know, or maybe we need to talk more about this topic, or, you know, but you would know what it would take to expand. Because otherwise, you're right, you do feel like, gosh, I'm reaching the same people over and over, and it's good, but I want to be introducing ourselves to new places. So that's just one example of what you can do. The other one is the personalization part that I was mentioning really is a big deal. And, you know, you see over and over how people build audiences of millions of people following them. And I think, gosh, they're not, you know, with all due respect to them, not even close to being as interesting as the people who come on CNBC, right? It's just that we're not doing what they're doing. So the technique sometimes is actually critical.
I really appreciate your presentation, and there are a lot of parts to it that I definitely left with. But one thing that really struck me was when you were talking about personalization, especially in terms of social media. And I'm thinking immediately to Twitter, because that's where journalists seem to live. And with personalization comes the rise of the journalist influencer, which there was a really good piece about that in the information, I think, this weekend. And it becomes sort of difficult to navigate the field in terms of fairness. And, you know, as we try to work out what it means to be objective and the future of objectivity and fairness, when we're also sort of being in this new paradigm of journalist influencers. Yeah. So how does then one also take into accountability, you know, how to hold people accountable, how to do reporting that then requires accountability, while you're also being shifted into an industry where being a journalism influencer really becomes your job?
Yes, no, it's an interesting question. And we get asked all the time on how do you help someone build an audience, right? An individual. And so in this case, like, I'm just going to make up the facts on the ground here, but you're doing columns and you say, you know what, Twitter's not exactly where I want to be all the time, but I understand I need to be on Twitter. Well, why would you want to be on Twitter? Because Twitter has one of the biggest impacts on search. So even though it can go the wrong way sometimes in discussions, putting content out there is very valuable to impact search. And that may be your goal. But then you might say, you know what, I really want to reach the business community more. So I'm going to actually start to complement what I'm doing and put it on LinkedIn. Or, you know, I need people to visualize this story. So I'm going to actually be talking about it on YouTube with some examples with a guest. But you start to think of each channel and its purpose more and say, okay, where is it that it's going to fit the style that you have so you can build that audience? And I'm not saying you said this, but you don't reflexively say, I got to go to Twitter. It could be that you want to actually make more of an audience in YouTube and LinkedIn, but not disregard Twitter because of that search capability. That's just an example.
You know, you mentioned we should be telling or connecting with our audience via audio. Is that as simple as, you know, I'm in print media. Is that as simple as creating a function on our website where, you know, we're reading the text of the story? Is it a Facebook Live or something where we dissect the story or talk about it more, I guess, informally? I mean, how do you do that, especially when you work at I work for a Gannett paper. It's very, the structure is very rigid, and I have no pull to add functions to the website and things like that. So.
Right. Got it. Yeah. So that I think a couple of different things here. One is, I don't know if you have podcasting equipment somewhere in the building, but if you do, it's usually not that expensive. It's a couple grand to get decent equipment for the whole building. I would consider, do I articulate more on a certain story and do a podcast? So if you can do that, you can't get it on your website. It doesn't mean you can't put it on Facebook or you can't put it on another channel. So I would think of where am I going to house my content in social if I can't put it on the website. You may decide that you want to do a regular set of interviews and actually give a shot at Spotify and say, I'm going to look at the articles that I do that are more deserving of that, and may continue my analysis further on Spotify, things like that. But I think that's what I would think of right away. I realize there's limitations in terms of getting the equipment, and so I would probably not go on the website if you had to go through too many channels, and just go right to social.
So I work at the Ledger Inquirer in Columbus, Georgia. It's a city of about 200,000 people. And we have, like I'm sure most of the people here have, a small subset of the audience that's very vocal, that absolutely does not trust us on any issue whatsoever. Are you able to overcome that with sort of personalization? Like, hey, I'm your neighbor, like I'm posting on social media, this is what I'm working on this week. Like, how do you handle that subset of the audience? Are these people that are just lost forever, or are these people that you can bring back into the fold?
It's a great, yeah, these are, all these questions are fun to address. When you look at issues, and particularly when you think of like chronic issues, what we would look at is to say, who are the people that group does respect? And this is a case where, if they're already coming at you and they're saying, we don't agree, you may say, you know what, I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to actually do an interview with that person or people that they really respect. And it may be something that you write, or it may be something that you do as a video, but you're showing that you're reaching out. That's one way to do it. Another thing that I found is, quite frankly, sometimes just picking up, usually there's not as many people being negative as it looks like. And you call that a handful of people who are the most vocal. Once they get a chance to articulate more one-to-one, they often aren't nearly as bad. So that's, but that's a separate item. I think what I would do is I would look to see who do they respect and say, how can I interview them, or get their opinion or do something that shows that we're really trying to address what their concerns are.
What if that person is a bad faith actor that pushes misinformation?
I wouldn't mess with them at all. I would concentric circle it all. I think of like concentric circles. Wouldn't mess with them, but who is listening to them that might really not be as on board as they look. And if you can reach that audience, you may tip it. So this gets to an example of when you're looking at folks who might join extremist groups, trying to reach the people who are truly extremists. They're not changing. But if we look at most people who might be recruited into a bad cause, they might be confused, they're not sure, they're espousing certain beliefs, but they may not even believe them. So if we can actually get in there and impact them, we have a chance to flip them before they go in the wrong direction. It's the same thing with any kind of chronic issue. We're always looking, it's not any different than like you think of politics. People are always saying, you know, who's in the middle? Like who are the folks who could go either way, or the independent vote? You know, who are the people that you think you could maybe convince, and don't mess with the people who will never be convinced.
Good point. Ariama, excuse me.
On the bad actor front, I actually had like more of a philosophical question. So like real life scenario, we had an election last year in like one of our swing districts, and it was either city council or center or something like that. But the dude who got accused of being like a QAnon member, right? And the conversation we had in the newsroom was like, because my editor is older at the time, he was just like, it doesn't warrant coverage because that's not a real thing and it's influencing blah, blah, blah. So he had that argument. And he was upset that other newspapers covered it at all and did the research and put in the time to figure out like, oh, is this true? And I was saying, well, nowadays in election, 2021, we got to at least talk to the guy, get his official statement, see what's up with that.
Yeah.
And my question for you is like, do reporters, by covering stuff like that, do we legitimize it, or I don't know, give like more influence to the QAnon conspiracy or whatever bad actor or person, and like give it more influence in like, let's say a local election or major election? Or do you think that we really have to like put the time in and research it?
It's more case by case than a blanket statement. But first of all, what I would have said to the editor was, let's look at who this person, if we're not sure if they're in QAnon, let's go actually look at who they follow. Let's actually look at what they do socially. And you might say, they're hanging out with a lot of people that appear to be in that organization. So there may have been an easy answer there to say, hey, this person really is in there. And it's pretty easy to show who they're associating with. So that's one thing you can do with very light analytics, or even just looking online in the right places. What I espouse is more of exposing how these groups work. So if we go in and we say group X is bad and here's why, we haven't actually taken the time to say, here's how the group works. This is where they operate. This is what they do that's not good. So you start to, it's like exposing let's say a criminal network. We wouldn't say the mafia is bad. We would say, here's how the mafia works. This is who's in it. This is what they do. This is not good. This is a criminal offense. And then we kind of expose it over time. This is part of what I'm trying to get at with ransomware and counterfeiting and illicit drugs. Those are criminal networks, but we tend to treat them like, oh wow, there's a lot of people dying of fentanyl overdoses in the US. It's like, well, if we go a little deeper, you can see exactly where they're coming from and who's doing it. So the question is, what do we want to do with that information? So I wouldn't say, the specific example you gave, that deserves specific knowledge, but I do think journalism plays a big role in exposing more of how these networks work. And why does that matter? If you took disinfo as an example, and you look at how disinfo has moved, let's say from Russia to here, Russia's depending on people to move that content. They are sometimes paying people to move it, but most of the time they're just, depending on what, are referred to as useful idiots, even though I wouldn't say that they're idiots at all, but that's the term used. So if we can expose the people that are being paid, that are actually moving content, those are folks that might go, I don't want to be exposed for this. Like, oh, okay, maybe I'm going to be stepping back from that. But you know, I think we can do more of making it hard to be bad.
So to the point about gamification of news, I did make a video game about voting in Texas. It was a desktop game trying to show how difficult it is to vote in Texas. But my concern is that we're in bubbles, that we're kind of like talking among ourselves. And I'm wondering, how do I get my message or influence into the other Earth 2, the other realm, the parallel world that we have so much in common, but we never meet?
Right. Well, this is where this is a deeper answer, but this is where, let's say the content you're creating is excellent. What I would then say is, okay, who are the people in that 9% who understand what you're doing would be very relevant? Are you following them in social media? Do you have their emails? Like, how are you going to reach that 9%? If you can reach that group with something that's well done, they're going to move it, and you're going to start to see where they move it, and then you can keep shaping the environment if that's the goal. You know, so if it was like, hey, we want to get out the word related to voting, related to the game that you put together, who are the people who care about gaming, voting, political issues, and all that, and you can see that. So that you don't have to have analytics to do it. That's helpful if you do. But when I say analytics, it's not expensive to do this kind of stuff. But even if you don't have any money, you can still look online and say, who cares about these topics? Am I following them? You may, here's another item there, is that you, David, you may say, you may want to see that someone has a big audience that you're trying to reach. How do you actually bring them into your world? You know, do you invite them in to be quoted in one of the articles you're doing? So they're now going to talk to their audience about it, and you're expanding the reach of what you're doing. So there's a bunch of techniques there. That would be a whole session in itself, but that is very common to do in the business world. Is how do you take an idea and move it out to an audience that can really get to understand it and be exposed to it for the first time.
Thanks so much for this. It's been really helpful. I just wanted to follow up on Ariama's question, because I think it's one that in our newsroom we grapple with a lot as well. And, you know, especially this year with vaccines and with elections in Texas, you know, there's been all these claims of fraud. And, I think we would love to kind of look at who is pushing this misinformation and how, but those investigations can take 6 months to a year. And so when we're being inundated with, especially politicians or even trusted sources like doctors saying that, vaccines are killing people or that there's rampant fraud, I guess, what do you think is the most effective way to report on those things, to not elevate those inaccurate claims, but also providing people the context they need to, come to a reasonable assumption about that? Because obviously,
Allie, the way I would answer that would be, I think journalism historically has said, hey, you have certain sources or you have certain people that you go to and they're really smart. There are data science firms that you should think of as sources in that way. And so I would go and say, why would I take a year to do this? I can go to a certain data science or analytics firm and say, hey, here's what I'm trying to solve for. Who are the people who are anti-vaccination? What are they doing to do the following things? And they can come back and say, these are the people, this is what they're doing, these are their techniques, these are the channels they're using, these are the words they're using, all that kind of stuff. So you can expose what's happening far quicker and then decide what you do with it. So I would treat people who are good at technology as sources with the same level of credibility you would for others. You got to, of course, make sure that they're the firms that you trust, right? That always goes with it. But that's what I would do, because I think that could elevate journalism like that in terms of getting knowledge. Yeah, and that would be one, that's an area where there's a lot of information out there that would be fairly easy to find, to back up what you're saying.
I'd like to thank Bob, but also to talk further about in the coming days about how you can use these insights and ask the questions of data scientists who are there to help you to think about these problems in a new way, and how you can partner with them to kind of expand your own reporting, but also the way in which you're reaching out to your audience. So it's both digging up, the investigative scoop, helping you sort through the data, but it's also using data scientists to think about how you are reaching your audience, or who is your audience, or who are these sources, who are these 50 people, who is this 9%. So we'll be talking about in the coming days. Bob has very kindly agreed to answer more questions, so I'll turn it over to him. But I just want to thank you so much, Bob, for being here today, and then turn it back to Anne.
Okay, great.
When you're talking about, tracking search, and so sort of how search is changing, and how using that as, how the conversation around anything is changing. Do you, search engines and everything are geared toward us personally, right? So how do you get around that to sort of see a more generalized picture?
Yeah, no, that's great. So this gets back to human patterns, right? So, I mean, everyone on this call knows the 5 W's. And when you think of like a topic, what I said in the very beginning was that 200 to 400 questions is about as much as a community can think of on a topic. Well, if you break that down and go further and say, if people are searching about a certain topic, how many queries are there that you really need to look at? Probably like a max of about 100. Doesn't mean it couldn't be more, but it's not that many. So if we can start to think of like, okay, what questions would people ask about this topic? What queries would they make? Well, then if we're looking at that body of what people are searching for, you know what people are finding, what they're discovering. And then from there, it's just a matter of what judgments we make. That can tell you like which people have a voice in a topic that we might not have thought of, which organizations are out there doing more than we thought they were. Or is the topic changing, when we look across queries? So that's without doing any analytics at all. We can do that back of the envelope, but then you can get more sophisticated with the right data partner. And Sunny, what you said, I think is awesome, because this is exactly where it should go. And a group like that should have the best available algorithms and things like that to put journalism at the highest level in terms of intelligence. You all know what to do with the rest of that. But that's one of the things that I would do, Jacob.
David, do you have a follow-up?
So I'm wondering about Spanish language media,
Yeah.
and particularly like with WhatsApp, and there's a lot of Spanish language misinformation that's being done, like in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas.
Yeah.
And I'm sure in Texas, you've heard all this talk about the red shift along the Texas-Mexico border. And this, a lot of people are trying to figure out why that is. And from what I can tell anecdotally, it's because there is a lot of misinformation being shared in Spanish directly with people in the Valley, which most people in English media totally does not understand or see. And how can we get a better understanding of that event?
Yeah, I mean, looking and doing analytics in Spanish isn't hard at all. But I think, David, you're getting at a related point, which is that what we see worldwide, I won't speak to Texas, but just worldwide, is if you're pushing, if one group's pushing against the other, then those groups will go to different channels. If a group's pushing against someone in a certain language, they can go to a different language. And so what you're describing here are people messaging in Spanish in a way that isn't necessarily in the spotlight. That's an easy thing to figure out by looking at social channels, looking at forums, things like that. What we often see too is when people look at social channels, they may say, hey, nothing's happening. But then you go look at forums and you're like, oh, wow, super active discussions. And so it depends where people are communicating online. But it's exceptionally rare. In fact, almost never happens where if someone is trying to overtly influence someone or a group, they're doing it in a way that you can see. Like, so when people, you didn't say this, but if some people say, well, they're only doing it, offline, that's almost never true. Because even when they impact people offline, they will then talk about it online. So even if people were trying to influence people offline, there's going to be groups talking about it. And so you can then pick up that chatter and you can see what they care about. An example of that would be if you're looking at, get away from the example you gave, but just if you're looking at like people trying to recruit for extremist groups, the extremist groups may be smart enough to not say everything out loud, but the folks they recruit, not so. So you can usually zero in. So I would just take a look at Spanish analytics, and I bet you'd have a lot of your answers in there.
Well, Bob, thank you so much for giving us so much of your time and that fascinating presentation, as scary as it was. We do appreciate it. So if everyone could give Bob a round of applause, even though we can't be together in person.
This is the COVID-19 virtual applause, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you. I just want to say thank you. It's an honor to be asked to speak with you. I really look forward to everything you do to help society, and I'm going to be following probably as many of you as I can to see what you write in the future and learn from you.